We live in an age of high-tech where .com is the only familiar buzzword. In this age, communication is faster and more facile with the help of various high-grade gadgets, and gadgets are there to stay. We may be critical of gadgets, but we cannot deny the fact that education is nothing but a form of human communication where gadgets have a definite and determining role to play in a modern setup. Audio-video medium of instruction is gradually finding its place even among the most conservative instructors. When the audio cassettes are livened up with music and songs, they make the lifeless voice instructions far more effective and communicative to young learners. It is noted that English is not our mother tongue and it is taught as a second language in Bengali medium schools. So, the teaching of English, both as foreign language and as a second language, the electronic media plays a vital role in imparting education to the young learners. We all therefore hope that the teaching of English through the medium of recorded voice will bring cheerful help to all learners and listeners in general. Happy listening to all.
Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's mother was a noble lady. She loved to live among the poor villagers and do good to them. Once Vidyasagar went to see his mother in winter. His mother had only an old cotton shawl. She was wearing it. Vidyasagar noticed this and said to himself, "My mother has only an old cotton shawl. I will buy a good woolen shawl for her." So he bought a good woolen shawl for her. He gave it to her and said, "Mother, please use this shawl. Your cotton shawl isn't warm and it's old too." Bhagavati Devi smiled and took the new shawl from her son and kept it in her box. The next morning, she used the cotton shawl again. Vidyasagar was surprised. "Mother, why don't you use the new woolen shawl?" asked the son. "It's quite cold today. Don't you like the shawl?" His mother smiled and said, "You have certainly bought a nice warm shawl for your mother, but I have sons and daughters in this village. Many of them haven't got anything for use in winter. How can I use mine?" The kind words of his mother touched the heart of her great son. So he bought many shawls for the villagers. Bhagavati Devi was very happy. She distributed the shawls among the poor villagers. Then she began to use her new shawl. Little Robi lived in a nursery. It was near the servants' quarters. In those days, boys of most of the rich families lived in this manner. The children saw their mothers at bedtime or only when they were ill. They seldom saw their fathers. The servants usually looked after them. They used to give the children very little food. The children could not say anything to their parents, but servants told them stories and recited the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The children kept quiet and listened to them. They almost knew these great epics by heart. Very often, Robi's servant would give him some food and make him sit at a window. Then he would draw a line round him with a chalk, roll his eyes and say, "Now look, young master, stay inside this line and you will be safe. You know the story of Sita. Lakshmana drew a line, but she stepped over it. You know what happened then? The horrible demon got her. Then the servant would go out and stay away for hours. Little Robi wouldn't dare cross the line. He used to sit there and look out at the little pond and the banyan tree beside it. He watched the people come to bathe in the pond and the reflection of the banyan tree in the water. He looked at the houses, the trees, and the sky. He learned to observe things and stored them away in his memory. Years later, he wrote a beautiful poem about the old banyan tree beside the pond. We do not see the pond and the tree now, but the house and the windows of the room are still there, and there are Robi's books and his poems about childhood. There was a brave king. His name was Robert Bruce. Once he became powerless. His enemies drove him away from his kingdom. To save himself from his enemies, he took shelter in a cave in a far-away land. He was sad. He began to think how to defeat his enemies and regain his kingdom. Suddenly, Robert Bruce noticed a spider. It was trying to make a cobweb on the ceiling of the cave. The stone walls of the cave were uneven. The spider tried to go from one corner of the cave to another, but it slipped down again and again. Yet it did not give up hopes. At once it started to climb the wall again. It held the thread in its feet. This time it nearly reached the top. But then, alas, it landed on the same spot from where it started. The king observed the spider's sad and difficult condition. He compared his own fate with that of the spider. He also tried to rescue his kingdom many times, but he failed. Should he then hide in a cave like a coward? Never. The spider started to climb again. Once again, it had a fall. It fell 7 times, but did not give up. It tried again, and this time it succeeded in reaching the top. The king learned a lesson from the spider. He appealed to the people for help and collected soldiers to form a large army. Then he attacked his enemies repeatedly. At last, he won the battle and got back his kingdom. Florence Nightingale was born in the year 1820 in a small town in Italy. Her parents were famous and rich. They looked after little Florence very carefully, but Florence was thin and sickly. One day, little Florence said to her father, "Father, I would like to be a nurse." The little girl's father said, "My dear, I do not think you can be a nurse. Nursing is hard work." "I will try," said Florence. Soon she began to learn nursing at home. One day, Florence was returning home early from school. On the way, she saw a dog lying on the road. It was crying bitterly. An unkind boy hit the poor creature with a big stone. It hurt its right leg, and it was bleeding badly. Florence became very sad. She gently carried the dog home and nursed the wound. She tied a bandage tightly round the leg. In a week, the dog was quite well. Soon the dog became friendly with Florence. It wagged its tail and jumped around her playfully and licked Florence all over, as if it wanted to say, "Thank you, little nurse, thank you." Florence grew up and became a trained nurse. Then the Crimean War started. In those days, hospitals were badly run and the nurses were trained. The wounded soldiers were never looked after well. They died in the hospitals. Kind-hearted Florence felt sorry for the wounded soldiers. She quickly collected some good nurses with her and went straight to the battlefield in Scutari. She was not afraid to go there. No one could stop her. She found the hospital there very dirty. She quickly made it clean and bright. She and her companions nursed the wounded soldiers day and night with great care and finally saved the lives of many brave men. Every night, Florence went slowly and quietly from bed to bed and spoke softly to the patients. She always held a lighted lamp in her hand, so the soldiers called her the Lady with the Lamp. This is a story of two friends, Rajan and Rahul. They lived in a small village in Purulia. Rajan was the son of a poor cobbler. He mended shoes and earned some money. But Rahul was the son of the village chief. Everyone in the village obeyed the chief and he was very proud. He loved his son Rahul very much. But he did not like Rajan. Rajan had no education. Besides, he was the son of a cobbler. The chief did not want his son Rahul to play with Rajan. He did not allow Rajan to come to his house. Rajan was unhappy and sad. As he was a cobbler's son, he could not drink water from the well. He could not go to the temple. He could not attend the village festivals. Everything in his life was useless to him. One day, Rahul told Rajan, "Let's go to the nearby hills. Everybody says it is beautiful." So, early one morning, they started from the village. They walked a long distance. At last, they came to a big pond. It was 12 noon and the sun was shining over their heads. The two friends were tired, so they sat on the banks of the pond. Suddenly, they saw something shining in the water. Rahul went down to pick it up, but his feet slipped and he fell into the pond. Rahul could not swim. He shouted, "Help! Help! Save me!" Rajan jumped into the water and saved his friend. Somebody gave Rahul's father the news. The chief rushed to the spot and brought the two boys home. He understood his mistake and he was ashamed. He did not hate Rajan anymore. He treated him as his own son and he let the two boys play together. He said, "We should love everyone as we are all men and therefore we are all equal." The day is very hot. In the classroom, the teacher shakes his hand fan with all force, but finds no relief. The boys feel terribly thirsty. They go to the nearby well to get drinking water. Bhim cannot join them. He is not allowed to sit with other students of his class. He waits near the door for his only friend to bring water in a small earthen pot. That kind boy will then pour the water from above in the open mouth of Bhim. Here is another incident. Two teenagers, Bhim and his brother, are seen standing helplessly on their way to Goregaon. They will have to go a long way to meet their father. It is noon. The two boys are very tired, so they take a cart. The cart driver comes to know that the passengers are untouchables. He throws away their luggage and makes them get down from the cart. He will not drive his cart with untouchable passengers. Bhim, the poor boy, was then an untouchable. These are only two of the many insulting experiences Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar had in his childhood and also in later life. Bhimrao's first name was from his mother Bhima and his second name was from his father Ramji Sangpal. Bhimrao was born on the 14th of April 1891 in a tent of the military headquarters at Mahau in central India. His family moved from place to place with each change of his father's job. In Satara, he was first put into a school. Bhimrao received kind treatment too. A teacher lent his surname Ambedkar to the boy to save him from the cruelties of the castists. This teacher was a Brahmin by caste. From then on, Bhimrao was called Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar. Ambedkar was a very intelligent student. The Maharaja of Baroda sent him abroad for higher studies. He did his MA from the University of Columbia in America. On his return, he took up teaching in a college. Ambedkar fought against the cruelties of casteism. He held meetings and organized satyagrahas and protested against untouchability. He wrote pamphlets and periodicals and distributed those among the people. He wanted equality and justice for the untouchables. With his band of followers, he entered temples and used the water of protected ponds. Ambedkar felt the need for education and founded many educational institutions. As a member of the Governor's Council, he did many things for the welfare of the backward people. Pandit Nehru admired Ambedkar for his knowledge of law. He made Ambedkar the first law minister in free India. Ambedkar took the leading role in drafting the Constitution of India and was called the father of the Indian Constitution. People fondly called him Baba Saheb. All his life, Baba Saheb Ambedkar fought against casteism or the wrong idea of division between man and man. Religion, he thought, should be above all narrowness. He became a Buddhist in his later life. Baba Saheb Ambedkar died on 6 December 1956. Once there lived a mosquito in a pond. The pond was her favorite place. She was living a peaceful life there. But one day, she came to the pond and found that her dear dirty pond was not there. It had turned into a very clean pond. She was shocked. The homeless mosquito did not know what to do. She had nowhere to go. She began to cry. Suddenly, she saw her friend the fly. She also looked very sad. "What's the matter?" asked the mosquito. "Please don't ask me," answered the fly with tears in her eyes. "I'm hungry. I visited many kitchens. The food was all covered and I could not eat anything." "That's very bad," said the mosquito. "I am also unhappy. Look, my favorite pond is gone. Where should I lay my eggs?" Soon, a group of young boys and girls came to the place. They were students. They stopped in front of a heap of garbage. "Look, a heap of garbage. How bad it smells. The mosquitoes and flies are having a feast there," said Topon, one of the students. "Let's clean the place tomorrow," said Shomir. "I will bring a spade and a bucket." "I am going to bring 2 brooms and some bleaching powder," said Bina. That will be good, said Topon. The next day was a busy day for the boys and girls. They all came with brooms, buckets, spades, and bleaching powder, and they cleaned the place. The whole locality was clean then. There was no dirty pond. There was no garbage heap. The mosquitoes and the flies had no place to live in. The fly said to the mosquito, "We have no food here. Let us move to a dirty place. We will carry the germs of malaria and cholera with us." The mosquito said happily, "There I am going to lay eggs, and I am going to raise a big family of mosquitoes there." Henry Louis Vivian Dirogio was born in a Portuguese Indian family in Calcutta on 18th April 1809. At that time, Calcutta was not as crowded as it is now. It was then a lonely city. People used palanquins and horse-drawn carriages for traveling within Calcutta. Some rich people used elephants. Here and there, one could see stables for horses. Dirogio lived in a red building near the Durga at Moulali in Calcutta. He was junior to Raja Rammohun Roy by 35 years and senior to Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar by 11 years. Henry went to school at the age of 6 in the year 1815. He was a student of Dharmutala Academy. David Drummond, a famous teacher, established the school near Chandni Chowk. Students had to cross on foot a road and a vast field shaded by green trees to reach their school. Henry Dirogio's father was Francis Dirogio. He belonged to a Portuguese merchant family. He was an accountant in a merchant office named J. Scott and Company. He earned a lot of money and built a beautiful red house at Moulali. Henry lost his mother at the age of 7. His stepmother loved him deeply. He had great interest in studies. For this, everybody loved him. He had a soft and sympathetic mind and had great love and respect for his family. Henry studied at Drummond School till 1823. The teachings of David Drummond influenced him greatly. According to Drummond, man is the greatest of all creatures, and serving man is to worship God. This thought of Drummond influenced the life of Dirogio very much. Dirogio was a very bright student. He often stood first in English and other subjects and got gold medals. Dirogio became a teacher of Hindu College, now Presidency College, in the year 1826. He was 17 years old then, and some of his students were even older than him. He was a brilliant teacher. Students had great respect for this young teacher. Some students of senior classes also came to attend his lectures. They also had great respect for him. He taught English and European history. He organized group discussions and debates even outside the classroom and himself joined them. Students were attracted by his genius and polite behavior. He organized a debate society called Academic Association. Plato, the great teacher-philosopher of ancient Greece, also organized such an association and called it Academus. Dirogio took the idea from Plato and inspired free thinking and reasoning among young students. He inspired the youths to fight against superstition. Soon he became an idol of the youths of Bengal. His followers were called Young Bengal. Seldom has a teacher exercised such a great influence on his students within so short a time. Unfortunately, Dirogio died only at the age of 23 on December 26, 1831. But he left his mark on the history of modern Bengal. In fact, he was one of the makers of modern Bengal. What are you going to be? What are you going to be? I shall be a pilot. That's the life for me. What are you going to be? What are you going to be? I shall be a farmer. That's the life for me. What are you going to be? What are you going to be? I shall be a football player. That's the life for me. Who has seen the wind? Neither I nor you. But when the leaves hang trembling, the wind is passing through. Who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I. But when the trees bow down their heads, the wind is passing by. Have you ever seen a desert? It looks like a sea of sand. The camel, which takes a traveler across the desert, is rightly named as sheep of the desert. It trudges along through the waves of sand called the sand dunes. Mustafa, a camel driver, was a good man who had a bad camel. It was stubborn and always bore a grudge against his master. Why should he ride on me, sitting comfortably on my back, when I have to wade through the hot sand under the scorching heat of the sun? The camel grumbled. Really, it is very hard to live in a desert, as it is either very hot or very cold. Suddenly, these two travelers were caught in a sandstorm. When the storm stopped, Mustafa found that they had lost the track. Neither an oasis nor a caravan was in sight. The sun had set and it was getting dark. So he decided to stay for that night at that place. He put up his tent and slept comfortably inside it. The camel stayed outside, munching a thorny bush that grew nearby. It was a moonlit night, and the desert looked extremely beautiful. But the camel had no eye for such scenic beauty. He was shivering in the cold. The sand beneath had turned icy cold. He woke Mustafa up from his sleep and said, "It is very cold outside. May I put my nose inside the tent?" Mustafa was a kind man. He said, "Yes, you may," and he fell asleep. A few minutes later, the camel nudged him with his nose and said, "My long neck is nearly frozen. May I put it inside the tent?" Mustafa let him put his neck inside and fell asleep, only to be roused again. This time the camel said, "It is biting cold outside. Please allow me to keep my forelegs and hump inside." Mustafa felt sorry. He moved to the farthest corner of the tent in order to make room for the camel's long legs. He had hardly had a wink of sleep when the camel drew his hind legs and the tail inside and made himself quite comfortable. Now Mustafa became angry. He said, "What are you doing? It is a small tent. If you occupy all the place, where shall I go?" The camel insolently replied, "Either you or I should sleep in the tent. There is no space for both. I've spent the first half of the night outside the tent. Now you spend the latter half outside. I'm going to sleep here. Don't bother me." Poor Mustafa had to spend the rest of the night under the starry sky, freezing in the cold. Who does not like to look at a green stretch of grassy field? It is soothing to the eyes and refreshing for the mind. A poet aptly described it as God's handkerchief. Grasses are the biggest and most successful family of plants. They were the last group of flowering plants to grow gradually on this earth and survived when other plants had died out. Most of these plants do not have woody stems like other large trees, and they die down to the ground after flowering. Many are annual. They live for a season, produce a large quantity of seeds, and die. Cultivated grasses are called cereals. Wheat, maize, rice, sugarcane and bamboo are all members of the grass family. The tallest member of the grass family is the bamboo tree, which is most abundantly found in Asia. Unlike the other members, the bamboo has woody stems and may grow up to 40 meters, that is 130 feet in height. It is also the fastest growing of all existing plants. People who live in bamboo growing areas use it in almost unlimited ways. Most people are fond of bamboo sprouts and cattle graze on it. In West Bengal and Assam, low-cost huts and surrounding fences are made with the bamboo. Bamboo stems provide an ideal building material and the leaves can be used for thatching. Inside the huts, bamboo-made furniture can be found. People often catch fish with the help of bamboo fishing rods and put their catch in a bamboo basket. When the catch is brought to the kitchen, scraps of bamboo are used as fuel to cook the fish. Containers made of bamboo are used as vessels. In China, people eat rice with the help of chopsticks that are made of bamboo. You must have read about Raghu the Bandit by Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. It is amazing how Raghu ran several miles on a stilt made of bamboo. Some jamindars in those days planted bamboo clumps on the borders of their own lands. Now, bamboo trees spread their runners underground after completing their upward growth. At the advent of spring, this sideways sprawl stops and new sprouts push upwards. Later, the Jamindar's bodyguards used to walk long distances using stilts. They were armed with bamboo sticks or javelins with bamboo handles, and they claimed all the land as the territory of the Jamindars as far as the bamboo clumps had spread. Bamboo pulp is used for paper making as well. As a result of rapid industrialization, large areas of bamboo forests are wiped out every day for supporting the paper mills with raw materials. The tribal people who used to earn their livelihood by basket weaving suddenly find themselves in a fix as there is dearth of raw material. Bamboo is a wonderful plant. It provides housing, food, paper, weaponry and so many other things that people must take care of its growth and maintenance. It is the national duty of the people to extend active support to protect the green covering of our country. Long, long ago, the world was different. There was neither danger nor trouble. The children got everything they wanted. They never quarreled and they never cried. Life was pleasant. There was no hard work, no unhappiness. Children laughed and played throughout the day. But that was before a little girl named Pandora came to live with Epimetheus. Epimetheus was a little boy of her age and he was her playmate. When Pandora came to live with Epimetheus, she saw a huge box at the door inside his house. Pandora was curious about this strange box. She wanted to know what was in it. "What is inside this box?" she asked Epimetheus. "Don't ask questions, Pandora," said Epimetheus. "It is a secret. I don't know what is in it. God has sent this box. If we open it, we will be sorry. Come outside and let us play." Pandora became more and more curious. "Perhaps there are toys in the box," she said to Epimetheus. "Perhaps there are beautiful dresses or nice things to eat. Perhaps there are such things," said Epimetheus. "But we must not disobey God. If we don't open it, we won't know what is inside," said Pandora. The next day, when Pandora was alone in the cottage, she looked at the mysterious box for a long time. It was made of polished wood that shone so brightly that Pandora could see her face in it. It was carved with beautiful designs of flowers, fruit, and pretty faces of children. In the center of the polished lid, there was a smiling face that seemed to tell Pandora, "Why don't you open the box?" The box was not locked. Pandora tried to lift the lid, but it was too heavy for her. Pandora could hear little voices calling to her from inside the box. "Let us out, Pandora. We'll play with you. Let us out." Just then, Epimetheus came and stood at the door. If he had stopped Pandora, then the contents of the box would never have been known. He saw Pandora opening the box, but he was as curious about the box as she was. As Pandora opened the lid a little, the cottage became dark. A cloud of tiny winged creatures flew out into the room. Epimetheus cried out in pain, "Oh, I am stung! Oh, Pandora, why did you open the box?" Pandora began to cry. By lifting the lid of the mysterious box, she had let out all the troubles of the world. She had set free all the cares, diseases, and sorrows. It was the first pain that everybody felt in this world. Suddenly, they heard another voice from inside the box. "Let me out, Pandora. If you let me out, I will comfort you." Pandora opened the lid, and out flew a bright little fairy. She touched Pandora and Epimetheus with her magic stick, and all their pain was gone. "Who are you?" asked Pandora. "I am Hope," answered the smiling fairy. "I help people to bear the pain." This is true even today. Hope gives new life to the troubled world. Hope makes all things look bright. Some are fond of sunshine. Well, so am I. But I like the rain too, falling from the sky. For when merry April trips over hill and plain, isn't it delightful running through the rain? Bright-eyed little blossoms growing by the way look up as we pass them, laughingly to say, "So the shower has caught you and escape is pain. Isn't it delightful running through the rain?" Pitter-patter, softly drip the drops around, while a peeping sunbeam gilds the scented ground. Shelter nowhere near us, yet we don't complain, for it's so delightful running through the rain. One day, a funny kind of man came walking down the street. He wore a shoe upon his head and hats upon his feet. He raised the shoe and smiled at me. His manners were polite, but never had I seen before such a funny-sounding sight. He said, "Allow me to present your highness with a rose," and taking out a currant bun, he held it to my nose. I staggered back against the wall, and then I answered, "Well, I never saw a rose with such a funny-looking smell." He then began to sing a song and sat down on the ground. "You never heard in all your life such a funny feeling sound." "My friend, why do you wear two hats upon your feet?" I said. He turned the other way about and hopped home on his head. The sun has long been set. The stars are out by twos and threes. The little birds are piping yet among the bushes and trees. There's a cuckoo and one or two thrushes, and a far-off wind that rushes, and a sound of water that gushes, and cuckoo's sobbing cry fills all the hollow of the sky. Coral has been highly valued through the ages. It is one of the wonders of nature. It is a strong substance formed from the bones of very small sea animals. Perhaps of all the things on earth or in the oceans and seas, there is nothing more beautiful than a coral. Coral grows in different kinds of shapes. Some corals build stone-like structures that look like the curling stems of climbing plants. Some build structures that look like vases or fans. Others build structures that look like the brain or like feathers. Coral may be of many colors. White coral is as white as snow. There is another kind that is flesh or rose in color. Deep red coral is very beautiful.
There are also purple, violet, yellow and black coral. Yellow coral is very rare and the black coral is very precious and expensive too. White, pink and red corals are quite common. Earlier, people had a wrong view about coral. They thought that coral was produced by either plants or insects. In 1723, a French doctor discovered a small sea animal, which is now called the polyp. Coral is formed from this polyp. The stone-like structures that polyps built around themselves remained after the polyps died. They often form islands and reefs. These coral islands and reefs are found in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, where the temperature is not less than 68 degrees Fahrenheit. You must have read about the Lakshadweep and the Maldives and the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. There are many other smaller islands. Most of the corals come from these places. Today, there are many coral shops all over the world. Thousands of people are working as coral experts. Only an expert can tell us the value of a small piece of coral. A piece of coral is cut, then it is examined, after that it is shaped and polished before it is sold in the market. Coral has become as much valued as many other precious stones. There is a superstitious belief about coral. People have worn coral for good luck through the ages. In early days, soldiers sometimes placed coral in their helmets. They thought that it would bring them luck in battle. Some people hung coral around their children's neck so that they might be free from danger. Today also, you will find many people wearing rings and necklaces with coral set in them for luck or good health. It is interesting to note that coral produced by polyps has been valued through the ages for its beauty and magical powers.